access to that and everything on our website by depositing your first $10 into DraftKings using the link in the description box below. We're going to be having weekly DraftKings videos as well on the channel, so hopefully you guys can enjoy that. We've already had loads of comments on people who have been having fun with DraftKings and already winning money. But that's enough about that. Let's get into the waiver wire targets, and we're going to start with running backs. Leading this list is TJ Yeldon, and as we know, Fournette has that hamstring injury. It's a little bit too early to tell if it's going to hold him out for the week or if this is something he can just bounce right back from. I will say that this team really doesn't need him or need to rush him back. The offense really does work well whether he's in the backfield or not, aka if he's out and Yeldon's in there, he's going to be scoring points. And if you ask us, it's in the best interest of the Jaguars organization to hold Fournette out. As we know, he's more of an injury prone player and he does have a high chance of re-aggravating that injury if he is rushed back too soon. So all of you Fournette owners, you're probably going to be rushing to grab Yeldon. He's definitely in line for some major touches, and this isn't the first time Fournette's been out, so we know that Yeldon doesn't necessarily have RB1 upside, but he could flirt with that RB2 level production. And to get that type of production this quick, maybe to somebody who drafted McKinnon, it's going to fill a nice spot on your roster. So TJ Yeldon leads, and then we have Matt Breida. He's coming in at 59.9% ownership. He had 12 touches, which was the same as Morris, but the difference is Alfred Morris got no receptions. We know that he didn't really know the playbook very well, and that could have been why he was limited, but Morris is owned everywhere. If you look for him, he's over 70% owned. Breida, 59.9%. There's a chance he's on your waiver wire, and he actually averaged 4.2 yards per carry. Compare that to Morris's 3.2 yards per carry. Oh yeah, and Morris fumbled the ball. So we saw what happened when Alex Collins fumbled the ball. Teams don't like it, and the fact that they lost, they're going to be breaking down everything with a fine-tooth comb and realize what went wrong. Morris coughing up the ball doesn't help his case, especially considering that Breida has better hands than him and was more efficient on his touches. You're not going to just grab Breida off the waivers and just put him right into your lineup, but if you stash him, he could turn into something more throughout the season. Next, we have Aaron Jones at 41.7%, so that means he's available in over half the leagues out there. And Jamal Williams, as much as we love him, he didn't look great. Despite playing from behind the entire game, they refused to get him involved in the passing game, and whether that was by design or just sheer circumstance, it's one performance that was poor and one game closer to an Aaron Jones return. Now, Jones is not guaranteed starting duties as soon as he gets back, but if Jamal Williams does struggle on the ground again, you best believe that Aaron Jones is going to get an opportunity to perform. And with the possibility of Aaron Rodgers not seeing the field in week 2, it's very possible that Jamal Williams struggles again, leading the way for Aaron Jones to get major opportunities in week 3. Next, we have Austin Eckler of the Los Angeles Chargers. He is only owned in 11% of leagues, and let's just start by saying Eckler looked great. He looked even better this year than he did at the end of last year, and anybody that watched him play just knows that he's going to have a role in this offense, and he is going to be in consideration for weekly flex value in PPR leagues. With that said, his upside is going to be capped. Melvin Gordon, barring injury, isn't going anywhere, but if he continues to get those 3 to 5 receptions per game, he's going to have a safe floor, and we saw what he did in the efficiency department. He could have games where if you spot start him, he could surprise you. Like I said, over 20 fantasy points last week. Next, we have Bilal Powell of the New York Jets coming in at 56.1% ownership. Now, this video is being recorded before the Monday night game, so his value is either going to climb or fall depending on the results of that game. If you watched it, you probably know the answer to it, but as for now, he should be owned in basically all 12-team leagues. And if you're a team that's lacking running back depth, take a shot on Bilal Powell, especially in PPR League Standard. He does not really have the same appeal, but considering he's playing on a team that's going to be playing from behind, and he's the primary pass catching back in this offense, there is also a chance for him to be a consistent performer with upside if anything happens to Crowell. Unfortunately, we do know the kind of player that he is by now, and we shouldn't expect a ton from him. He's not going to just all of a sudden be an RB1, but we do know that he does have the ability to go on some of these hot runs where he does score RB1 type numbers. And if he does go on one of those streaks, you're going to want to own him. So if he's on your waiver wire, take a look. He's owned in just 56.1% of leagues and add him to your roster. Now moving on, we have Nyheim Hines Hines, the Indianapolis Colts, owned in just 7% of leagues. I can't say that I'd be super excited to have Nyheim Hines on my team, but he did get 7 receptions, which is super respectable. On the other hand, he wasn't very efficient, but he could turn into somewhat of a Theo Riddick, Chris Thompson type player who takes a hit in the efficiency department. I wouldn't really expect his role to increase just due to the amount of receiving weapons out of the backfield this team has. But if you're in a deep league, take a look for Nyheim Hines on your waivers. Just keep in mind Mac is coming back, who is also a solid pass catcher, so don't think this is some sort of high upside waiver pick. The last player on this list is also from the Colts. It's Jordan Wilkins, 39.7% ownership, and unsurprisingly, Wilkins didn't play well. In fantasy football, we're looking for touches, and touches is something that Jordan Wilkins has the ability to provide your team. And think of it like this, it could be some sort of low risk investment where you could just hold on to him for a few weeks, flip him if he has a big game, but just know if Mac returns, it's more than likely going to be a 3-headed monster that you just want to avoid. Okay, so that's it for the running backs that we would take off the waivers. Let's move on to those wide receivers, and to lead this list we have John Brown, Baltimore Ravens, coming in at just 21.6% ownership. And in his first game as a Raven, he looked great, and more importantly, he looked healthy. As we know, health has always been a concern with John Brown, and now it looks like he has a legitimate shot at staying healthy this season. Not only that, the top option in the target department for the Ravens is wide open. If you think it's going to be Crabtree, just know he had 2 drops almost immediately, which is something that he struggled with greatly throughout his entire career in both San Francisco and in Oakland. And if Crabtree loses Flacco's trust, the next man up is none other than John Brown. Add him if he's on your waivers. He should be on most all of yours. Next, we have Tyler Lockett coming in at 53.8% ownership, and this should not be a surprise to you guys. He looked great. He had about 3 receptions, a long touchdown, doing Tyler Lockett things. But most importantly, this team just lost Doug Baldwin to a knee injury. As of the information released today, it's a torn MCL, so he's going to be out for the season, which means Lockett is in line to be a key part of this passing game, more so than he was before. We already projected him to be the second receiver on this offense. Now there's a potential that he could lead this team in targets. We do like Brandon Marshall, and we're not ignoring the fact that he's on the team, but what we're looking for is upside. And if you're giving us a choice between the young player who is extremely talented and has a good athletic profile, or an aging veteran receiver who's been hit or miss over the past couple seasons, we're going to take the younger guy with the talent. Moving on, we have Ryan Grant of the Indianapolis Colts coming in at 9.7%. And all I should say to you guys is that Grant had 9 targets, T.Y. only had 11. We do know that the Cincinnati Bengals probably game planned for T.Y. Hilton. They wanted to take him out of the game knowing that it was his primary weapon in the passing game. Nobody's going to game plan for Ryan Grant, a somewhat unknown guy who has absolutely no name value across the league. Nobody's afraid of Grant, so why game plan for him? But when you see those types of targets and those types of numbers, and you're the number 2 on an offense that's going to be playing from behind a lot, with a good quarterback, a great quarterback, that has a ton of value, and Ryan Grant should be owned. If you're really thin at the wide receiver position, Grant does have some upside, especially in PPR leagues. Next player is Brandon Marshall, 5.7% owned, and this kind of ties in with the Tyler Lockett situation. Doug Baldwin's gone, and surprisingly, Brandon Marshall did pass the eye test, and what this means is that Brandon Marshall could potentially end up as the team's primary receiver. Like I said, we would put our chips into Tyler Lockett, but it's still too early to tell who Wilson is going to be able to rely on a week over week basis. It's just too small of a sample size, and at this point, Marshall does lead this race by 1 target, but Lockett does have years of rapport with Russell Wilson, which should help give him the edge in the end. Moving over to Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers, coming in at 34.8% owned, and Williams definitely benefited from some garbage time production. As we know, the Chiefs really took a big lead, but with that defense losing Bosa and a lot of their weapons in the defensive backfield, we could see a lot of garbage time. And as for what we've seen between the preseason and this first game, Williams and Rivers, they're on the same page. He has definitely taken over the wide receiver 2 role ahead of Tyrell, which means that if anything happens to Keenan Allen, you got a complete monster on your hands. In the meantime though, he's going to be a matchup based boom bust flex play, but when you're talking about a player who's 1 injury away from being a high-end wide receiver 2, he's definitely worth the add. Next we have D.D. Westbrook. Not much to talk about here, owned in 8.1% of leagues. Westbrook had more targets than Keelan Cole and is an all-around better athlete than Cole as well. It's a low-scoring offense with low passing volume, but Westbrook can definitely be classified as a diamond in the rough. I wouldn't pick him up and start him right away, but there's potential. And lastly, we have Geronimo Allison coming in at 4.4% ownership, and simply put, he's Aaron Rodgers' 3rd receiver. Cobb historically can't stay healthy. Devontae Adams has had a ton ton of concussions, and Jimmy Graham is on the back end of his career and hasn't looked like the same player that we have seen in his heydays with the New Orleans Saints. As for Allison's individual production last game, he looked good, caught a good touchdown, and if you're looking for a high upside guy who could potentially be top 20 if a couple things go his way, Allison fits the bill. Alright, that's it for wide receivers, and to help you guys keep this short, we're going to put an animation up for the tight ends, the quarterbacks, and the defenses. Let you guys also know who the streaming options are, but there's no need to overanalyze any of these guys, but feel free to hit the pause button on the screen and save it just so you know exactly who we have ranked for waiver wire. So as for tight ends, we have Kittle, we have Gates, Benjamin Watson, Howard, Eifert, and Eric Ebron. We wouldn't recommend adding these guys and keeping them on your roster for weeks at a time, especially if you already have a guy that you plan on plugging in. But with the loss of Delaney Walker and Greg Olsen, I can understand how a ton of you are pretty needy. Question that came up to me is, who are the best streaming options and who's a guy I can pick up and start potentially every week? And the answer to that is George Kittle. He's not only the best pickup option and stash option, he is the best streamer because Marquise Goodwin is potentially missing time and realistically he could lead this team in receptions. Next week they face Detroit and that's a matchup that has some shootout potential. I'd do my best to start Kittle if I had no better options. And moving on, we have quarterbacks and we have Tyrod Taylor, Case Keenum, Derek Carr, Andy Dalton, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Eli Manning, and Nick Foles. This is the current order that we would take them in, and I think we just have to talk about Tyrod Taylor. He should actually be started if the matchup dictates. He's a mobile quarterback, he's good with his legs, he's going to have a safe floor, and with the weapons that he has between Jarvis Landry, Josh Gordon, Duke Johnson, he just has too many weapons to fail. If you're looking for a guy that you can start this week and even perhaps stash for later on in the season, Tyrod Taylor, he plays New Orleans, who just allowed 40 plus fantasy points to Ryan Fitzpatrick. As you know, Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't on this list. He's a little too hot and cold for our taste. He's more than likely going to be a short-term rental unless somehow Jameis Winston loses his job to Fitzpatrick, but we like to think that he's probably going to implode at some point. If he does it again next week, maybe we'll give him another look, but at this point, we're just kind of seeing it as an outlier. As for Taylor, definitely not an outlier. There's high winds, a lot of rain in that game, and he still performed well. If you're struggling to fill the position, look for Tyrod Taylor, and also Case Keenum is another guy that you can stream this week. He's facing a terrible Raiders defense that just lost Khalil Mack. He looked absolutely great against the Seahawks, which we know aren't an ideal defense at this point, but his connection with Sanders was really something special, and if he can continue to build off of that and maybe even get Demaryius Thomas more involved, Case Keenum has the potential to put up some really solid numbers. And the last player for a streaming option is going to be Nick Foles, and he is streaming option only. Do not add him and expect anything more than that. Carson Wentz is coming back and Nick Foles is straight up looked like garbage. But if you're in one of those leagues where everybody owns two quarterbacks, maybe you have a deep bench in your league and all you're left with is just the bottom of the barrel quarterbacks, Nick Foles could be a guy that you could put in for this week. He faces Tampa Bay. It should be a fantasy friendly situation. It's not going to have a ton of upside, but he's coming off of a match in which he scored 4.6 fantasy points. So you know that nobody's going to own him. And there's always the chance that he regains some of that postseason magic. On to defenses. We have the Bears, the Lions, the Panthers, the Packers, the Browns, the Dolphins, and the Redskins. I have to start by saying if any of you guys have the Bears on your waivers, add them right now. 39.9% owned, so that means 6 out of 10 of you guys can add them, and they are a must add. Khalil Mack turns this team into a potential top 5 defense. Trust me, if you don't pick them up this week, somebody will, and you're going to regret it. Another defense I think we're talking about is the Packers defense. We saw them limit Chicago to several 3-and-outs, and they also only allowed 13 offensive points, which is something to look forward to. If there is a return of Rodgers in the near future, he could definitely help out this defense by keeping the offense on the field. And if you noticed, they came back really well. And yes, Rodgers played good, but this defense definitely did their job as well. Another defense that people are sleeping on is the Redskins defense, coming in at 9.7% ownership. Alex Smith's ability to take care of the football improves defenses. It's not a question, it's a fact. Having these long drives and controlling the pace of the game, it means your defense gets rest, and it also tires out the other team's defense. What else does he do? He limits turnovers. While I wouldn't say that they're a lock to start every week, if they're in a good matchup, they're more than likely going to have a good performance. So just keep that in mind. The last defense is a super sleeper. I'm not recommending anyone that has a better option take them, But if you're in a tight bind or you're playing DFS, take a look for Dallas versus the New York Giants. They're not going to cause a lot of turnovers, that's a fact, but what they will do is be snug when it comes to the red zone, and they're playing the New York Giants. Although they have a ton of weapons, Eli Manning just can't seem to put it all together, and until they prove otherwise, they are going to be an offense to target. One last note, guys, if anybody drops the Saints defense this week, and believe us, they will, they scored negative fantasy points, pick them up. Every team has a bad game, and I fully believe that this defense has improved from last season. It was a divisional game, so you know those are always a little bit fluky, and Fitzpatrick has some Fitz magic, so give them the benefit of the doubt. If they perform poorly again, you'll know it's a wasted investment, but at this point, if they fall on the waivers, they have too much potential to just leave there. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this week's waiver wire video. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.